everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. My name is Madison, and I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, joined by some of our community members and two special guests, which you will get to know in just a moment. So tonight we're talking about decision making, and we start off with a word association. So once you see your name up on the screen, give a brief little introduction in 1 to 3 words that you associate with the topic and why.
All right, I can start off. Hi, I'm Leora. I'm a high school senior from right outside Boston, Massachusetts. What first came to mind is not for me because I am so bad at making decisions. I wish I was better at making decisions, and it's important to make decisions, but personally, it is a very challenging thing. I don't know if anyone's ever seen The Good Place, but I kind of feel like Chidi in The Good Place, so.
Hi, my name is Chabu. I am 19 and a first year at the University of Toronto. And decision making, what comes to mind for me is the word synergy. I feel like really good decisions feel right in a lot of different ways, accomplish a lot of good goals at once. And so that's my word for decision making.
Hello, my name is Angel. I'm 18 and I'm a first year at Yale. And, okay, I have to agree with Leora on this one. I'm really bad at making decisions. So I would say that my word is impulsive. I'm bad at making decisions, not because I can't come to a decision, but because I'm too rash when I make decisions. And a lot of the times when I do happen to be in the position that I need to make a decision, it's definitely not all the time based on clear thought and rational reason, but emotional. So yeah, impulsive.
Hi guys, my name is Matt McCoy. I'm an early professional pursuing entrepreneurship. The word that comes to mind for me is overrated. Kind of a weird word, but I feel like it's better to just do than make you kind of like think about decisions all the time, and then like that's how you learn. And I'm excited to be here and meet everyone.
Hi, my name is Allison. I'm a sophomore. I'm 16. I'm from Ohio. Sophomore in high school. But I agree with Leora. I'm extremely indecisive as well. But for me personally, most of my decisions come from my morals and my values. So I would say morals / values is what I would associate with decision making.
Matt, can you repeat your words? I think Madison missed it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
My word? Overrated.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, basically the thought was that I feel like that's something I've done a lot in the past, is like have tons of anxiety around decisions. And I just like ping pong, ping pong, ping pong. And I keep feeling like the more I just take even a tiny micro step in like one direction, like I guess you can call that decision, or you can call it like a step, like is the way. Whereas decision making to me seems so mental. I think of like more action, and then action is the decision, and then you'll learn. If that's too philosophical, I'm sorry, but like that's just what came to mind.
No, that's great. On kind of related to that, easier with practice. So you can get stuck on a decision like forever, but to me it's like the reps and just getting lots of life experience and just seeing what the result of different decisions are.
Madison, should you
Do
go
you
or
want
should I go?
do you want to go ahead and share yours?
Of course. So I think I have to quickly introduce myself. So Karim, working at Schmidt Futures, Harvard grad in philosophy. Glad to be still alive somehow. And I am so thrilled actually to hear all of your responses, because I think we are exactly all on the same page about a number of different things. The way I would phrase my word association here would be, again, to trust your gut feeling and press all the buttons in a way. And there's a thing that my middle school computer teacher, Mr. Marco, always used to say. It was idle at yes. And I think I took it to mean that you should always embrace new things, always say yes to novel things, and hopefully they'll make your decision making better.
Oh, like default to yes.
Default to yes, so that you can, again, learn, experience, do as many things as possible, so that your gut feeling becomes quote unquote wiser, and then your decision making just even better. But I think it all just like comes down to trusting your gut and just going with what you feel is the right thing to do, which I think Allison might have alluded to earlier.
That's funny because Gary says the opposite. I've heard him say default to no. Say no to new opportunities.
Well, it depends on where you are in your life, right? If you have good things that you're like all in on, you can go to different modes, right?
Yeah.
Gary, I feel like you have to watch the movie Yes Man.
Wait, who's that by?
So I'm not sure who's he by, but I know Jim Carrey is in it.
Oh, okay. I'll look
Madison, what about you?
Yeah. I was gonna say, so much of what has already been said, something that I've been like exploring recently is like, I would say like what comes to mind is like defaultly or like by default binary. That's probably a better way to put it. I think a lot of times it's like it's black or white, yes or no, but there tends to be a lot of ways to work around it and not just be as binary as we normally think that it is, especially as it comes to like post-secondary paths or even like within high school. So that's something that I've been exploring more recently. But yeah, so now that we have the word association out of the way, we can go ahead and get started with the conversation. So does anyone have a question or provocation that they want to pose?
I think Rushank is here now.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, no problem. I just woke up. I've been having some issues. It's like 6 a.m. But yeah, I don't know. For me, whenever I think of decision making, one thing that always comes to mind is critical thinking, because a lot of the times we fall prey to biases that we don't even realize we have. And so it's important to look, at least that's what comes to my mind. It's important to look at both sides of the issue before coming to a decision.
And Rushank, you want to tell us like where you're calling in from?
Yeah, so I'm calling in from Bhopal, which is a city in central India.
Oh, awesome. It's cool. We have people from a lot of different geographies here. It's going to be a good conversation. Okay, so now we can actually get on to the conversation. So if anyone has a question or provocation they want to pose, go ahead.
I'm happy to get started with a question. Well, I think a lot of what has to do with decision making is, you can only make a decision based on what you know, correct? So, and hopefully you get better at making decisions throughout your life. So I'm assuming that the only way to get better at this whole thing is to learn more. And I guess like this seems like a pretty basic question to ask, but it may not be as intuitive as you might think. How do you learn? How do you actually grow? We always talk about these two things, but tangentially, not tangentially, but tangibly, how do you learn? How do you grow? Rushank, I know it's early in football right now, but what do you think? What's your gut feeling telling you right now?
So this is an interesting question. I feel like, as you said, practice is really important. So I feel like it's really helpful to, for example, if your parents always trust you with making your own decisions, then you get a ton of practice and you're like, okay, this is like an actual responsible thing that I have to do. So that's one way you learn and grow, at least in my opinion.
My answer is a little circular, but I think that in order to learn how to make better decisions, like you said, you have to default to yes and start making decisions. I feel like the best way to learn is by experience. Extremely cliche, but it's cliche because it's kind of true. Like I know for me personally, going out into the world, especially during, pandemic, for my first semester, like leaving home and having to have the responsibility of actually making decisions for myself, that I would be one of the sole people who would feel the brunt of the consequences, whether good or bad. I learned a lot in how to make better decisions, how to make more informed decisions. And I don't think I would have reached the same magnitude of growth without like diving deep, So I think that in order to learn, you've got to do it full steam ahead.
Angel, I had to read this one book in college for one of my philosophy seminars, and we had to take a deep dive into this book by Aristotle called Nicomachean Ethics, which is pretty much how to live life for dummies. And Aristotle would say exactly what you just said, that you can only achieve what he calls his virtues by actually doing an actioning on those virtues, whether you know that it's brave or not. If you can just follow somebody's lead and think, all right, this is a brave person, so whatever this person does is brave. I don't know what it means to be brave, but I still do what this person is doing, and hopefully I will become brave. So I'm just, again, I'm high-fiving through the screen because I do think that, at least in my very limited experience, you can only get better at decision making by actually making decisions. And they don't have to be good. You don't have to be good, but you just have to do something. You just have to make these decisions in one way or another.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I guess I would. One of the things that comes to mind is, and I think it's what you're saying about the doing, is that there seems to be a lot of, I would say, hubris in like the analysis paralysis, like thinking that we literally have enough information to make informed decisions, and then we just go back and like. I almost feel like, even if you're like thinking about what your subconscious like biases, like there's almost, if you really go down the rabbit hole, always like way more, like abundantly than you could ever comprehend into making a decision. And so I think like logically it then makes sense to just do the doing, and then like you gather more information that way. And then, so I think there's like a logical side, and then on like the spiritual side, The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, like self-realization, I think like in Buddhist culture, like that stuff, I think there's a lot of stuff out there and like mysticism that is about, right, like doing. And then through that process, right, you just talk about like the hero, like what is brave, like follow that path, right? Like, and I think that's like an all spiritual text. Like they're all saying that for a reason of almost like human behavior of like do this thing. And like that is the path to becoming, I guess, like what you are, your essence. Yeah.
That's great.
I really love this question, especially in relation to like decision making. And I think that the best way that I have liked to learn, especially like in the most recent months, has been through observation. So it's not necessarily a matter of like reading a higher quantity of books or like, seeking out more information. Like information will come your way. But it's really just like treating the content that you're exposed to and like seeing what can I learn from this? What can I draw from this in terms of inspiration and insight? And that doesn't just apply to like intellectual texts, like, being out with friends, interactions. I think that there's a lot to be learned from just like the day to day. And it's also a source that never stops giving. And that really helps inform effective decision making, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to like add on to what Angel was saying earlier about experience. I think that's what it has totally been for me. I think in the same poem meditation that said, every man is an island, it also said, affliction is treasure. And that's not to say that everyone needs to have really hard times in their lives in order to grow and learn. but definitely it forces people into learning more. That phrase really kind of stuck with me as I think about I'm a stronger person because of what I've been, not directly because of what I've been through, but because I've survived what I've been through. And so thinking about really experiencing and then taking that experience and applying it for good is how I've personally grown over time.
I agree with everyone. However, for me, I personally, well, I guess based off my decision making skills, I guess, through trial and error. But basically, I would like make a bunch of decisions, and then whatever like good outcomes, I would like think about it, and then try to make like a similar decision based on that. And then if it's like a bad decision, I wouldn't like make it in the future. So that's how I kind of like gain, an idea of like how to make better decisions in life. And then I agree with Angel. Experience is very, very important. It's how I grow. But yeah.
Yeah, this makes me want to pose a new provocation. I'm going to pose learning from other people's decision making.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's something that I love doing. Kind of related to Leora's point about experience as a forcing function for growth. I like to think that I don't need to experience all the hardships, all the bankruptcies that all the great entrepreneurs that have told their stories through biographies and podcasts have experienced, and military generals and et cetera, et cetera. So I love reading biographies, love, I've listened to thousands of hours of podcasts of people's stories, really. It's made a huge difference in my life.
There's two quotes that come to mind. The first is a proverb from Madagascar, which I think is hilarious. It goes, "The wise man learns from his mistakes. The wiser man learns from others' mistakes."
Yep.
So this case it perfectly applies. Crap, now I'm forgetting what the other thing I wanted to say. Oh, the other thing is, I believe a quote by the Dalai Lama, and I believe he said, I never lose. I either win or I learn. And I think the second one, the first one is definitely funnier, but the second one I think speaks to me more, because again, you cannot really make a bad decision. I think you, at least in my experience, I've always benefited more from doing stupid shit and learning from it, because I would rather live with that lesson than the remorse of not knowing what goes on behind it. Those are my 2 cents. I love pressing all the buttons, because I think you never know what can come out of it, because I think your experience is absolutely unique and different from the other person's mistakes in that case.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Gary.
I just quickly I've both read about people losing a bunch of money in the stock market and lost a bunch of money in the stock market. One of them is a lot better lesson than the others.
Yeah, but I feel like that's a terrible example. I'm sorry, but just because of the last 2 days, I mean, hedge funds have lost billions of dollars because 2 idiots on Reddit, just like said something. So I feel like there's something to be said about what we know, what the world, what we believe the world knows, and finding a way around it. Not finding a way around it, but understanding that causation, that correlation doesn't mean causation. I don't know.
I'll add on this, and I think it's kind of what you're saying. Like, the first question interests me more than the second, because I really don't feel like, maybe this is a bit bold, but I don't think that learning from other people's decisions, it can almost be counterproductive, or it's, if you don't know who you are to any degree, and almost you never, I think if you're doing life right, you never do, because you're constantly changing. But like, it's like, who are you looking to? Like, you're like looking to these people, and just because they have a platform or thing, like, they might be leading you like totally in the wrong direction. That, you know what I mean? Like unless maybe like a large number of people like agree on this person, where it's just like flat out, like, you know what I mean? But like, even those people, might completely not be the advice, like giving advice that you need to be acting on right now. And so I agree more with, again, like the act. Maybe you get to a point of centeredness where then you like see somebody that aligns and you can go from there. But I think you have to do. And so two things on that came to mind is, one is like, yeah, if you're afraid and you're excited, you probably should do it. And fear is different than danger. And so like, that's a big thing because you're not going to get hurt. And then the second thing is that there is no bottom. Like what is, if it's not dangerous, what is the bottom? You know, if you lose all your money and you learned a ton, where are you at that bottom? You might be at like a more enlightened place. And so like kind of questioning yourself constantly at what is that worst thing that you're afraid of? It might be just an image and a holograph. It's not real.
Yeah, I think I like agree. And I also, to Karim's second quote, I heavily resonate with that. Just from my perspective, currently now being under my parents' roof once again, and having been so for the past 18 years, it's pretty evident to me that my parents and me have different life purposes and life paths. And while I appreciate the wisdom that they continuously trickle down to me and my brother, a lot of the times it's not really applicable to me because because they typically tout they tell me that I should, learn from their mistakes, learn from what they've done. Like my father wanted to originally be, what did he want to do? He wanted to do something with his career. But then in order to follow the more economically secure path, he decided to abandon what he originally wanted to do. So he wanted to be like a geologist, and instead he became, computer scientist, IT, right? And a lot of people would probably see merit in what he did. And that's a really important lesson, I do think, but also I don't really think that I'm meant to apply that to my life. I personally would rather experience like chasing, like what I believe my purpose is. And if I quote unquote fail, well, there's no real such thing as failure. If you don't really see it as failure, it's all perspective. But that's okay. I've gained a lot of experience that I can apply to the next chapter of my life. So I think that it's important to learn from other people's decision making, but it's also important to understand that your life paths are completely different. So don't rely too heavily on what other people might have done and what they might believe is wise, because when applied to your own personal life, it might not yield the same results,
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I feel like this point, maybe Matt touched on it a bit, but I feel like when you're learning from other people's decision making, it's also important to be mindful of what those other people, quote unquote, are. Because usually there are people that have a large following or they're pretty famous, and there's nothing wrong with trying to emulate the success. But then survivorship bias factors in, because you don't see all the potentially thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that made the same decisions as the successful person, but they didn't end up in the same place. And that's because, again, each person's circumstances are different. So I feel like survivorship bias is something to be mindful of, because while one person might have made that good decision and ended up in a great place, there could be
Survivorship bias. Yes. So good.
It's so interesting because I usually take into account other people's decision making a lot because I'm so afraid of making decisions on my own. But recently, I'm a senior in high school, so I've had to make a lot of college decisions, like decisions about what my life's going to look like for the next 4 or 5 or so years. And to do that, I had to shut out everyone else's decisions and just focus on me, which is so difficult to do for me, who relies so much on others to help guide me. So it was just a really interesting experiment to do.
Go ahead, Chabu.
No, I just wanted to quickly mention that, like, I think that learning from others people's decision making or like their influence, it should always be like complementary. Like, it can't be the foundation or like, you know, the key component in your own personal process. Like, it should it should be more of like added value than like the, you know, core of what you're trying to do, especially since there's just like so much missing context, which a lot of people have talked about under this question, on just like what led them to that decision, what empowered them for that decision to be effective, what mistakes were necessary, or what support was contingent on, you know, that decision helping them rather than being, you know, a source of a new problem. I think that like decision making from others should really just be complementary. And at the end of the day, the only one who can really make a good decision for you is you, because you have all your own personal context, or at least the context of the situation.
I think, yeah, you'll agree with me when I say that there's remarkable beauty in the fact that in terms of space and time, absolutely no one has lived your life before, and that people might think that, you know, you might see yourself as just a normal other person or anything or something along those lines. But because of that beauty, I think, Leora, I think you owe it to yourself, and because of that incredible and absolutely unique path that you've lived so far, to actually listen to your own voice going forward and acting on it in the way that feels the most you. This is another like super cheesy quote, but what is it? Wasn't it Dr. Seuss who said, "Be yourself because everybody else is already taken"? So I think in a similar vein, I think you do owe it to yourself to be true to yourself, because again, the cosmic forces of the universe have put you here and now. And wow, I think I'm just derailing into madness. I think I need some sleep, but
It's so true. And there's very few, if any, institutional kind of forces that are encouraging you to be yourself, like your authentic self.
Yeah, to add on, when you're trying to like learning from other people's decision making, you're essentially kind of comparing yourself to how they made decisions and how you made your decisions yourself. And I think that's like a little bit like not like logically comparable, because like you're essentially comparing apples to oranges. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like everyone's decision, like what I have no idea how to pronounce the name. Rushank? I don't know how to pronounce the name, but I agree it's situational. But I think it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. Essentially, you can't. It's just completely different.
Yeah, and I think that
So
how you learn from the mistakes also says a lot. Like if someone brought up like observational learning from other people's mistakes, that's one thing. But if someone tries to force their lessons onto you, kind of like how Angel brought up, like with your parents, or if you see someone, they're like, I made this decision and it changed my life, like them kind of signaling, it's very different in how you receive that and what you actually learn and feel like you can apply.
So this might be a little bit of a tangent, but I think it was off of what Gary was saying, where it feels like to saying about how there's no like strong institutional force for being what you can be. Because like for me, like institutions are like tyrants, like by I feel like definition. Like every single like behavior we do is a cultural construct. Like if I was actually playing around this day, and so maybe if I'm going too far, but like if I like went on a tirade and started like swearing on this and like whatever it is, like who is to say that's wrong, I guess, right? It's like it would make the group uncomfortable, it might make myself uncomfortable, but like maybe that's like my authentic self. And then who is it that I'm like is saying I'm wrong in doing this? Like, you know what I mean? Like where does that go? Is it like we know from the past that like this makes people uncomfortable? Like, is it because we grew up and like the education system said like when you're in a group, like don't swear to make like, and so I think that's the point, is that like there's this like unraveling like of like trying on new hats as individuals and then like seeing whether ourselves, we can not be anxious and I guess give a fuck what other people's reactions are, and then keep going there. And then that's how we become, but we have to be willing to go there. I'm not sure if that.
Yes, it makes sense. I think we can get so paralyzed by the rules of institutions that we just don't take any risks and don't even explore, because we're so like, especially like kids in K through 12, they're so enclosed in like, I mean, they spend like almost like half, if not more, of the waking hours like in a desk where they're like kind of imprisoned, and they have very limited, I guess, freedom to do things, say things, wear things, learn whatever they want. And so that gets really internalized, right? So that's who you become. That sort of like meek, risk-averse person is who you become in the rest of your life, right? After you graduate, it continues to college, continues to when you're just doing corporate world.
I think there is a way to escape that, Gary, if that's what you're kind of aiming towards. I mentioned earlier that I moved to India shortly after college, and I had a couple of rules I set myself. And the one that I think is relevant here is that I promised myself never to live the same day twice. And I'm sure you've played games like GTA or Assassin's Creed or games like that, where you start and you can see the map, but all of it is blurry. And I remember thinking, wow, if today feels a lot like yesterday, I'm going to try to expand and discover more parts of that map. And this map can be a number of different things. It can be an actual place. It can be something new. It can be new people as well. But it's been one of the most rewarding lessons and rules that I've set myself. Obviously, it's not that easy, but I think you can make a bit of a conscious effort to get in that direction, and again, escape with this paralysis that maybe you talk about.
I think also, 1 second to get pronunciation. Okay. Rushank brought up earlier in the word association that critical thinking is an extremely important mechanism that allows us to make better decisions all around. And I think the ability to critically think, also with the state of self-awareness, specifically to you, Karim, as well, allowed you to realize that what you were doing for yourself wasn't working, when it came to, I don't know, like forming the most authentic version of yourself. But there's also, like, it's really important that we single out that link of critical thinking and the development of self-awareness, because without those two faculties, how would you be able to recognize that you're in this state of, I don't know, paralysis that prevents you from taking risks outside of the box that would allow you to more find the most authentic version of you, you know? Yeah, critical thinking is really important. And it's sad that we live in a society that actively suppresses the development of those faculties.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Critical thinking is, I think, one of the key parts of this process. And I feel like a lot of the times we do live in societies that try to suppress critical thinking, but sometimes it also might come from within. Like, humans are really social creatures. And if we see a ton of people doing one thing, it's really easy to get into herd mentality and do the same thing. Because if you were like, uh, if you were a cave person 200,000 years ago, that would be the right thing to do because you don't want to die. But in a modern world, it's much more important to see whether what everyone else is doing is the correct path for you to take, and then factor everything and make your own decision.
I'm actually surprised that we haven't, that when it comes to learning, we've mostly talked about experiences and, again, learning from other people's experiences or your own. but there is something to be said about learning new things from logical inference. Is that the word? Logical, I guess logical moves. For example, math and a lot of theorems in mathematics, geometry, even in science, I think come from logical deduction. So this is definitely one way to learn, but maybe less interesting, less fun to talk about now.
Yeah, thinking from first principles. Does anyone have any other like one more question or provocation?
Yeah, I think I'd like to pose one. Appropriate indecisiveness. I think that we've had a lot of great conversation around like the necessity of decisions and how to come about them, but like there also is like a good dose of like indecision that's important to appreciate.
Could you give us an example? Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if this is a good talk, but I guess just like the first thing that just came to mind was like, I'm not going to pronounce this right, but I think it's Shoshin or beginner's mind or something like that. And I think that's kind of like in like another way to say it is just like, it's a falsehood that we're not always living in complete ambiguity, not having any idea what's going on at any time, that we have any sort of control. And so it's almost like indecisiveness and ambiguity is like presupposes life. And then we think through our personality, like we said, like going through like being afraid in school and when we're little because someone spanks us or someone like says, you know, that was wrong. And then we create this like persona to like be, you know, like we're decisive and like whatever it is, but like we never know what's going on. And we always need to have a learner's mindset to everything and everyone, but also know that we're the only ones that can make an appropriate decision. That was more of a ramble than anything else, but maybe someone can go off.
I feel like this is appropriate indecisiveness. The first thing that came to my mind was the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a pretty famous effect in psychology where people don't realize how bad they are at a certain thing because they don't have the expertise to recognize that they're bad. It's kind of a circular thing, like you aren't good enough to recognize that you're bad. So trying to see when you're falling prey to the Dunning-Kruger effect can be really helpful, because in some situations you can trust what you know, what you think, because you have enough experience about the topic. But in other situations, it might be better to defer to expert opinions just because you aren't that advanced in that field. But yeah, again, it just comes down to recognizing where you stand in that area where you want to make decisions.
I love the perspectives that have been shared so far. And I think that like what this question really stemmed from was an experience where I had kind of everything lined up to like start a new project, and something about it just didn't quite sit well with me. And I think that like recognizing those like very minor red flags of like friction that didn't just quite sit right really pushed me to explore, okay, like what about this doesn't feel right? And, you know, seeking out some truths that may have been avoided or circumvented, and really improved like whatever was going to be put together going forward. So I think that it's appropriate in the sense that like hesitation should be respected, and it should almost be like a cue to yourself to kind of dive even deeper and continue investigation.
I think what you mentioned here, Chab, was super interesting because you describe having this indecisiveness because you were facing a novel event that you had not previously experienced. And I think that's great because a lot of what goes on into decision making, I think, is your sense of priority, right? There are certain things that you prioritize in life. It can be family, it can be your career, it can be other things. It can be things that are more minute, like learning how to play the song on the cello perfectly, for example. And the fact that you have this indecisiveness at certain points, I think it speaks to having to maybe reorganize or rethink some of your priorities in a way that will help you tackle this new event, this new situation, in a way that still suits you. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. If anything, I think that it also pushed me to recognize that I hadn't addressed some priorities in the decision making, which is not something that's not the way that I initially thought of it, but that makes so much sense. Thank you for pointing that out.
Of course. No, there was this super interesting thought experiment that my high school Spanish teacher had us do once, and I think I'd love to like bring this up to the rest of you. So imagine that you have a glass just like this one, which is empty, and next to you you have a bucket of sand, a bucket of rocks, and a bucket of water. And basically, your goal is to fill this glass up to the brim with as much of the three elements that you have next to you. And the key to it is that there's an ideal order with which you put in those things inside this glass. Gary, what do you think? If you had to fill this glass with either water, rocks, or sand, which order would you fill it in with? I'm putting you under the spot, but I'm curious to see how you think through it.
I don't know, big rocks, medium rocks, small rocks, sand, water.
And that's spot on. And basically this was an allusion to the priorities actually, because the first thing that you put in here are the big rocks. There's few of them, but they are the most important one. So assume that I'm just throwing in big rocks in this glass. Then the rest of the gap I can fill in with smaller rocks, in this case sand. And whichever is left, whatever space is left, I can just fill in with the water. And I've always thought that this was a super interesting way of looking at priorities, and that's something that regularly comes to mind. But yeah, spot on, Gary.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, or maybe Karim, you're not. Maybe you won't be surprised, but I think a lot of people, well, even a lot of people themselves are surprised how little they've asked themselves or been asked what matters to you.
Have you asked yourself this question recently?
Well, I mean, I'm always asking myself that question. But like, and one of my favorite exercises is an obituary exercise. What do you want your obituary to say? That's really hard for people. I think it's a really good forcing function.
So that was I went to a retreat recently actually, and we did a death and rebirth exercise, and that was like probably it built on what you're saying, the most profound thing. So basically over the course of the week, everybody got to know each other intimately and saw the bad and the good. And then someone goes and lays in a blanket, and then everybody says like the most brutal things, good and bad, like whatever they think. And it's just like in a lot of ways, like it's crazy to hear other people's feedback, because we have so many biases and walls that we build up in our own mind, like constructs that are just like not true. So I guess that is to say, like you said, like if we really recognize like what is it that we want at that time, there's probably just a really big distance that we already know. We know exactly the changes we need to make right now, but we're just like not facing the truth. So it's like a lot of times I think there's this degree of like, I don't know what to do, but if we like you just said, like put that there, like what do you want to be known for when you die? The answers are super obvious. It's like the force function reveals the truth.
Yeah, I like this because I think you should have indecisiveness or ambiguity about your decisions when there's a lack of clarity. And so I think that exercises like the obituary, or a couple days ago, I created a mission statement for myself, because it's something that you can like always refer back to and know if like whether the decisions you're making you think will best align with what either your obituary or your mission statement. And so I think that that's a really cool connector too. It's like a lot of times in decisions you can get wrapped up in the excitement of it or the possibilities, but it's important to like think long term. I don't know, it's a delicate dance too between not knowing exactly what's going to happen, but I think that having those sorts of exercises or thought experiments can help with the process of clarity and decision making.
What's amazing is that, as you point out, Madison, you don't know what's going to come. And so at any point, at any moment, your mental order may change, your ambitions may change, your priorities may change. And so it's vital to stay dynamic, and to keep learning, keep changing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anyone have anything else to add to this provocation before we move on to reflection?
Yeah, I just, what Karim said before about the rocks and the sand and the water is so, it reminds me of this. I looked for it because it used to be here, but I think it's at my dad's house now. This thing that my dad has, he's from Brazil, and it's this thing from Brazil where it's like a glass bottle, and it's like an image, like a scenery made out of sand. And it's so meticulously done, and it's always amazed me because to do that, you have to know, you have to put the sand in and make a picture out of sand, and you can't, like, and then if you mess up, you have to go back and like start it over, and it is incredible. And it's always amazed me to have that, as along with any artists, that you have to have this kind of belief that what you know that it's going to work out. And so even if you can't see the full picture at the beginning, they still start putting the sand in one by one. Anyways.
Yeah.
And on that same note, I feel like those bottles, no two bottles will ever be the same. Even if you do 1 million of those, it will never be the same, right?
All right, sorry about that. I was jotting that last point down. I'm going to go ahead and send the link to the notes in the chat so that you all can look over them, and we can get started on reflection.
Madison, I love how that last quote will definitely makes me sound like I'm a massive alcoholic. No two bottles.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, out of context, that is not the best. But okay, so I guess I can go ahead and get started. This has just got me thinking a lot because just thinking about decisions, even not making a decision is a decision, and decisions like make us, and they like the whole idea of like decision trees are like really fascinating to me. Like literally everything that you do stems into so many different possibilities. And so just thinking about that long term, I really like what Karim, like the point you're stressing about your ambitions can constantly change, your future can constantly change. And so I guess for my next steps, it's just like exploring the balance between those two things, and like being open to new things, but having a vision for the future. And just like how that balance kind of works is what I would say.
I think if I could tie this back with, I think, was it Leora? Leora, were you the one earlier who said that you had difficulty making decisions because you seek guidance and sometimes you don't have the guidance? So if I could tie that with what Madison just said, there's something I find incredibly comforting. It was one of those, maybe you're familiar with the theory of parallel universes. And that basically there's, I don't pretend to know it very well, or at least in depth, but I know that there is an infinite number of parallel universes where everything is true. And basically for every decision that you take or that you don't take, well, it turns out there's a Leora, at least one in a parallel universe, who did take that decision, who did not take that decision. So I find comfort in knowing that there's a bunch of Karims out there who did things that maybe I didn't have the guts to do. And I guess one of my goals is to make sure that it's the Karim in this universe that's doing all the dope stuff. This is how I, again, think through not having remorse or regrets.
That's so good.
Wow, I guess I'll jump into that, but that is weirdly comforting in a way to know that there's a bunch of other Leoras out there doing some cool stuff. But Yeah, I think for me, it has to, with a lot of what I touched on throughout this, it has so much to do with being comfortable and in forging my own path, in making my own decisions, and like separating myself from needing to have, not that it's bad to have guidance from others, but I think for me, it just means that I'm not trusting myself. And I should trust myself. So that's what I'm thinking about moving forward, is how I can continually try and forge my own path.
Off of that, it's a little bit separate, but like the thing that's coming up for me is how like everything accrues. Like not getting to know ourselves accrues, just like wealth compounds. Like everything compounds, right? And like not learning through action how to trust yourself compounds. Like you only then get worse at it. And so there's this, I guess, degree of I guess just like this whole conversation is really making me see and think from hearing all of you how important it is to listen to yourself and take action, because you like it's a double whammy. If you don't, you get worse at making decisions, which means doing. You learn to not trust yourself, which only gets worse over time. And there's an opportunity cost to not knowing who you are and what that would manifest to be if you did. And so I feel like this conversation just gives impetus to taking action, trusting yourself, and doubling down on that.
So when we started this conversation, I had the word of like synergy, and so much of what I had to say about like decision making had to do with like learning. And I think that I was very much using those words in the context of like external sources to help in decision making. And that there's also wisdom in like observing myself and learning from my own decision making so I can do better in the future, and taking that into account in the process. So this really inspired me to kind of invest more in observing myself and my processes and how that can be leveraged to make better decisions in the future.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen a lot of new perspectives here, and some of them were stuff. Some of those points were stuff that I didn't even notice. For example, the internalized kind of suppressive environment of institutions, and I feel like I'll make it a priority to kind of actively work against, like, not combat, not in an aggressive way, but just be mindful of this is the environment that surrounds me and how I can uh, still make good decisions despite that environment. And at the same time, I also like the analogy, and even though I've heard it a lot of times, this time was canon, and I'm not sure why. I'll definitely make it a point to list down my priorities and what I value, because again, values do factor into decision making. So yeah, those are going to be my next steps. And I know I just said this about institutions, and this is kind of ironical, but I have school right after this, so I'll probably have to hop off this call. But just wanted to say this was my first ever uh, conversation, and to be doing this. And hopefully I'll see you the next time. Bye.
It was so good to have you. Thank you for coming.
I think that, well, starting off from where I was in the beginning, I used the word impulsive to describe the word that first came to mind when I thought of decision making. And I think that I'm also extremely self-critical. Extremely self-critical. So, and I personally identify with being extremely, not extremely, but impulsive. So when I first thought of that word, I did think of it in a pretty negative context. And I think after this trek, learning how, or just seeing how everyone has emphasized how experiences have been one of the primary methods of, I don't know, cultivating a better them. I think I'm more appreciative of my, I guess, willingness, to put it in a more positive light, willingness to take risks and make decisions on a whim. I think that now being able to self-reflect, that impulsiveness has led to some of the best, I think, experiences of my life personally, and has led to me meeting a bunch of cool people. I applied to Civics Unplugged impulsively when my physics teacher sent me something like literally the night before it was due. And I thought to myself, hey, like, why not, you know? So I think that I'm going to start appreciating that side of me while also working to better incorporate what Chabu called like appropriate indecisiveness into, I don't know, just like living. So yeah.
I'll jump in. So what this conversation reminded me was, well, I think Matt put it well, everything compounds. And a big part of why I left Google was because I saw that really very, very few people like of any age were getting any help in learning how to make good decisions or find their U-shaped hole. And, you know, I think what myself and other co-founders realize is that we need to intervene as early as it makes sense to help people, help young people, young civic superheroes realize that they have unique superpowers, right? And to try to channel those in ways that are satisfying for themselves and good for the world. So, you know, I just think about how much I've grown in the past like 2 years, right? But, you know, you can get on a really bad track of like, again, instinctively just following what society, at least it feels like society's imposing upon you, versus like exploring, right? Like Karim said, like, you know, having a different day every day. That's a different like life orientation that, especially if you develop it when you're around the high school age, like you'll have that for the rest of your life, which I think is really beautiful. So I thought this was a beautiful conversation.
Yeah, for me, I learned a lot like about philosophy kind of, because I never realized that philosophy can be applied to decision making, which was kind of neat. Oh my God, I can't talk. Neat to know. And I definitely would look more into like internal, like I learned a lot more like internal decision making, if that makes sense. Because like most of my decisions are based on my morals and my values, but I'm gonna go like deeper than that, which is kind of like what appropriate indecisiveness is. But I just like learned a lot of cool stuff today.
Allison, I think you're gonna love learning more about something called game theory, which is how do you, again, given a specific set of things you can do if you're playing against someone, what is your best strategy if it's a one-round game or tons of rounds different. But yeah, I'll let you dig further if you're interested, but game theory is fascinating.
Yeah, this is cool. This conversation kind of went in the opposite way that I thought that it would. When I think decision making, I think of a long process, but we actually talked a lot about spontaneity and impulsiveness. And so it's really cool that even like before the conversation, it went kind of like the opposite way that I thought it would. So I really appreciate everyone's perspectives. Thank you so much, Matt and Karim, for coming. Loved hearing from you all, and it would be great to have you on again. Whenever you want to. We have these all the time. So if you ever have the time and something you want to talk about, just let us know and we can get you on one. But yeah. So actually before we leave, Gary, Matt and Karim, what were your thoughts on the Trek overall, like the format, since it was your first time?
Matt, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I don't have anything to compare it to, but I thought it was good. I like how I like the spontaneity of everyone can jump in and like completely direct where the conversation goes with the question or like I like how it's really fluid. So it does not feel forced at all, which I thought was nice. And so I don't know, it felt like a relaxed direction. So it's good.
I agree entirely. I thought it was nice also to see the various names on the screen, to basically see, oh, I've spoken already, this person has not. Maybe I should stay quiet for a little bit and make sure everybody's voice is actually heard. If I had to make one comment on how to make it maybe more dynamic, which it already was, but I think it'd be beneficial for future tracks where a person basically has to ask a question to one other person specifically, just so that we don't only talk about what we feel, but we also engage with the other person, which we have done today. But I think it could make this even more. It could make the conversation slightly more directly with one another.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, sometimes it's like there's a question and everyone's like answering like kind of in isolation, versus
Exactly.
like, oh, like, so it's like question, Karim answers, Gary asks a follow up to Karim, and then like there's maybe a mini thread there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you respond to somebody else's comments?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome. Love it.
Also, one other comment is like not to like force disagreements, but it's like kind of what you're saying. Like maybe like at the end, like does anyone disagree with what anyone said? Because I feel like a degree of like confrontation would almost like take the conversation even deeper and further if everyone was able to be kind about it and not take anything personally.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm writing those down.
We're good. Yeah, this is a really iterative process, and love the feedback. Thank you so much.
But truly well done, Madison and Gary. This was great, and I think what you've been able to do so far is really as far as a Zoom conversation really can take a really heart to heart. So yeah, congrats to the two of you and the rest of Civics Unplugged.
Yeah, and
thank you guys. It was awesome meeting.
Yeah, we evolve this like every single time. There's always something that we're changing. So Gary and I will definitely jam on this and see how we can integrate these into future tracks and make them even better. So thank you so much. And I will see you all later.
All right.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
Take